Alex. Feels weird us being in here, right?
I know.
I know.
Really
So obviously we've been best friends for like, what is it?
3 years.
3 years now. You're like my big sister. We started skating together and we used to argue
I know.
all the time. How many times did I throw a tantrum and walk out?
A lot, very
I know,
often. It
I know.
happened more often than I would have liked it to
I know.
happen.
But it's weird how it's weird how close you get in it
I
when
know.
you're partners, like all the time. You spend
become
so much
family.
time. And then obviously since I've been working on it, we've become close. And something that we spoke about briefly, but you never really went into depth talking to me about, which you should be very proud of because it's amazing. But obviously you're a stroke survivor, right? And I don't even know the full story myself because you never felt fully comfortable talking about it, did you?
Yeah, I think my first year with you, I didn't really want anyone to know because it's kind of, as a stroke survivor, you know, it's kind of a detrimental thing to your career. So I didn't want anyone to know that I had had any health issues. So I kind of tried to keep it as secret as I could for a long time, actually. But by the time I got to you, I was on year 5. So it had been.
Was it more like you didn't want to talk about it because it was like you thought it would damage your career, or because you just felt sensitive about talking? You just kind of wanted to not just think about it, talk about it, and just forget it in a way.
I think, to be honest, I wasn't ready to do it. I really was uncomfortable, and I'm still like right now, like my hands are clammy and they're shaky. The idea of this, I could talk about anything else, but the idea of talking about what happened and how bad it was, and it's not comfortable, I don't think, for anybody. So I didn't want to put anybody else out by being uncomfortable.
I know even the amount of times we had the chat, whether it was last year, the year before, it would go into it and you'd always kind of divert off because you never felt fully comfortable. Like, obviously, take me back a little bit to a few years ago when it happened. How did it come around? Was it something that was out of the blue? Was you skating full time at the time?
So I was on cruise ships and I was 24, and I had been skating, you know, with Disney and Royal Caribbean, and I was skating in Mexico with all these other companies, and I had been fine. I had no medical issues, no anything. And I was on the Navigator of the Seas in their ice show, and I was skating on the ice, and as I went to get off, I felt my right foot go numb, and I was like, oh, it's cold in here. You know, your feet fall asleep when you're in your skates. And I went to untie my skate, and I realized that I really couldn't move my right hand. I couldn't really function. So all of the skaters were behind the scenes, and they were taking their costumes off and getting ready. The show had just finished.
And no one knew at this point that it was anything serious?
No one knew anything. I just went down to untie my skates, and I realized I couldn't untie my skates. I couldn't, for some reason, fiddle with the laces. So I started to take my costume off, and I took off my entire costume, basically, and I put my clothes on the rack, and I went to pick up the hanger to put it onto the rack, to hang it onto the costume rack, and I couldn't lift my right arm to hang it up on the rack. So I walked into the toilet. There's a toilet backstage on these ships, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I had absolutely no idea who I was. I saw myself, and I was looking at myself, but I had no idea who was looking back at me. Like, it didn't look like the same person. And at that point, my whole right side was numb. And so I was banging my hand on the sink, and I thought that I was just doing this. And in reality, I was like smashing it on the sink. And so somebody banged on the door and opened the door and said, "Are you okay?" And when they looked at me, I collapsed.
And then you just collapsed at the time there.
And so basically they took me, I was wheeled down and taken out of my skates into the hospital ward on the ship, and the doctors pulled me in. They laid me flat, and when they laid me on my back, basically a stroke is a blood clot to your brain, so it causes, like, you'd have zero functionality at all. And I said a couple words. At this point, I wasn't speaking at all, and I said a couple words when I was laying flat, and then they sat me back up again. So the blood clot continued, because apparently, I guess that has something to do with how you lay down. And then I couldn't say anything, couldn't speak.
So it got worse by doing that?
It got worse. And so they gave me a shot of Valium, and Valium is a blood thinner. And it broke up the blood clot to my brain. But I was out with no speaking for about 8 hours. I was passed out, and then every time I woke up, I couldn't speak. And then I would pass out again. And then luckily for me, when I woke up, one of the times I was able to read a sign on the washroom, and it said, "Restroom, wash your hands," and I just screamed it at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and all the nurses came in and they realized I was getting my function back.
When it first happened, did you have any idea, like, you never knew at the time symptoms of anything like that?
Nothing.
Like, now I know you're so aware, you do so much with charities and stuff, so you know a lot of this. At the time, was it you had no clue what any of these symptoms were?
No, and the scariest part, I think, was I was on this ship with all these doctors that were great doctors, but I was 24, so nobody was like, oh yeah, that's a stroke. Alex is having a stroke. They thought maybe it's a panic attack. I was actually drug tested. They thought that I was on drugs in the middle of the ice show. They had no idea because it was, one, so out of character, and two, I was
And you had so
becoming
many
fully
tests
disabled
as well before.
Yeah, so then I was in Tenerife. I was in the Canary Islands. They landed me off the ship and they took me to a hospital, and everybody was like over the age of 70, and they thought that, well, we'll put her in this ward and we'll see what happens. And within like 2 days I was talking again, but all my words were slurred and I couldn't really string together sentences, and I was trying to like write an email because my parents weren't there and I couldn't tell them. And they did all these tests and they couldn't find that anything was wrong, like with my arteries or within an MRI scan or a brain scan, anything like that. So then they flew me from that hospital to a hospital in Miami. And in Miami, they did the final test, which is, it's called a transesophageal echo. It's where they put a tube down your throat and they look at a camera and they basically see, and they found that I had a hole in my heart. So I had a hole in the back of my heart since birth. Just
And
like
no
a
one
birth
ever
defect.
knew.
No one knew. So that was what happened, was the hole in my heart caused the blood clot to my brain that caused the stroke.
So then, obviously, this has happened. Your mum and dad have probably only just found out
It was horrible for them.
towards the back end of it, right, afterwards, because you couldn't contact them. What was the process after that? Obviously, you're in Miami and you found this out. Did you go straight back home and take tests and look at kind of the next step?
So it's actually a crazy story. So the day that I had that last test, I woke up that morning and I got an email and they said, congratulations, you've been accepted to the Dutch Dancing on Ice. We love you. We'll see you in a month. And I was like, oh my God, this is like the biggest break of my career. Let's get this last test done. Maybe it was a migraine. We didn't know for sure it was a stroke because it was diagnosed as a stroke in Tenerife in the Canary Islands, but it was in Spanish.
Yeah.
And then when we went down to Miami, the doctors were like, you had a stroke, but we don't know why. We need to finish these tests. So I went for the final test. And when I woke up from the test, because they put you to sleep, the doctor said, well, good news and bad news. Bad news, you have a hole in your heart. Good news, we can fix it. Either you stay on blood thinners for the rest of your life, you take medicine, but you can't skate, or you have heart surgery. And I was like, awesome, heart surgery done. That was on a Friday. And on Friday, they discharged me from the hospital. They readmitted me on a Monday at like 5 in the morning, and I had heart surgery on Monday.
You have the heart surgery, right?
Yeah.
And this is in...
So this is in Miami.
Miami.
So
then after this, how long is the process afterwards of recovering? Because I don't know anyone apart from you that's had that, especially at your age. What's the process afterwards? Like, did your parents fly there? Was you in hospital for a long time?
So I should have been, basically, it's kind of a patient procedure where you have the surgery and then you can kind of go home the next day or day or two after. So I think I stayed for 2 days. And then they sent me home. And everything was okay, and then I actually relapsed. I thought I was having another stroke because I have still symptoms now, but I had every symptom of a stroke again. And so they readmitted me that weekend. It was American Thanksgiving. And they readmitted me, and they basically said, you're fine. The heart, the valve has stayed or whatever. They patched it up, but we need to keep monitoring you.
The dancer. How did you even... I was going to say physically, and mentally keep yourself strong to go straight into something like that? Because obviously I know you're an emotional person as well.
Yeah.
How did you keep yourself together in a completely different country and physically get your body prepared for something like that?
I think at that time I was just on like autopilot. I think when I had my stroke, I was so focused on I need to get back. And, and then I get this partner and he's a really nice guy, and I just was so tunnel vision with him, and I said I felt like I had something to prove that I didn't want anyone to know, so no one could know.
And you
over
wanted
there.
to prove to yourself as well, right?
And I was like, I have to make sure that I can still do this, and I felt so much weaker than everybody else, and it was horrible, but it was like the best time of my life winning the show, and it meant so much. But it also, after that, I came home to America after being in Amsterdam, and I definitely dipped. I definitely was a bit depressed and overwhelmed, and so much had happened in such a short span of time. And when you have a stroke, it's a brain injury, so my brain was like rewiring, and I was, but if you met me before my stroke, I'm not very emotional, but now after it, I was crying a lot, and I was really high strung, and not to blame it on having a stroke, but
No,
my
of
emotions
course.
changed. I was really different than I was
So
before it.
how is it? How do you deal with everything now in terms of? Obviously, you've had the surgery, and thankfully you're healthy. We see you
Yes.
skating out every week, doing flips and
Yeah.
jumps and crazy. How is it now in terms of? Do you still have to regularly go for checkups? Is there always like a procedure you have to go through?
Yeah, when my first few years after the stroke, I had, monthly checkups or a couple monthly checkups and then yearly checkups. And now, lucky for me, like the device is staying where it's supposed to stay. Everything's good.
Yeah.
And I do get checked every year, but also I'm on an aspirin every day. So,
Even me now hearing it firsthand, I didn't like. I'm blown away myself because you never told me. How much does Dancer on Ice UK mean to you? Because I know when I first met you, you was emotional in terms of everything that happened that you never went into depth about, and then you wasn't meant to be on the show, and now like you're such a huge part of the show in terms of how much does this show mean to you?
I think this show it means everything because it was my recovery. If I
Yeah.
hadn't been, I'm going to get emotional.
It's all right.
If I hadn't been on the Dutch show, I wouldn't be where I am now. And so the Dutch show, this version of, I always wanted to do it in English, but being a part of that and making somebody love what I love is so different. Like when I had you and you still like it,
Yeah.
it means so much to me because it was all I ever wanted to do. And when I
Yeah.
knew I was sick, the worst thing wasn't, oh my God, you had a stroke and you could lose your right side. The worst thing was, oh my God, you could maybe never skate again. And that was like,
So for you, it's more. It's not just about the sport. It's
Yeah.
more about the whole process
Yeah.
of falling in love with like loving something and the process. And even I know myself. Like I always say, I always say to you, I had the best partner because you was like emotionally there.
Yeah.
You're. I see you even with when Michael was here
Yeah.
and last year with Brian. You're emotionally there for everyone because you know the process of how tough it can be. And I think that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it does. I think I know what it's like for it to be taken away. So I know every day, like they're long days. I know it's tiring,
Yeah.
but I'm that one that's annoyingly happy usually because I'm like, it's okay. I still get to do it.
Yeah.
You kind of said like how, I guess you said, how did you feel? Like, how do you get through it? Like you're on the Dutch show and what do you do to get yourself back to normal? Basically, this is a really funny story. My dad, do you remember back in like 2012 where they'd have TV shows with like chat rooms? You remember
Okay,
you
yeah,
could
yeah.
write into a chat room? I don't know if you guys have that here, but you could write into a chat room with American football in the States on
Right.
ESPN. And I was like at my lowest point. I tried to skate after a week after the surgery and I was miserable. And I was like, I'm not going to the show. I can't do this. And my dad wrote in to a chat forum with this guy named Teddy Bruschi, who is an American footballer that had a PFO, a hole in his heart, and had a stroke. And he was, I think, 32 or something at the time. And he was a presenter now talking about football. And my dad wrote into the chat room saying, my name's Alex Murphy. I'm 24 years old. I just had a stroke. I don't think I can get back to what I'm doing. I'm a professional figure skater. And his agent read it, got him in touch with me. They got in touch with me on Twitter. And then next thing I knew, I had a pen pal. He reached out to me via email. So
No
throughout
way.
the entire show, during the Dutch show, I emailed this amazingly famous American footballer every single week, telling him how it was going week by week. And he took the time to write back to me and say, Al, you're doing amazing, and pay it forward, and you're so lucky. And he said something to me that I never forgot. And he said, now every day that you do what you do, whether you read a book or you cross the street or you put on a pair of ice skates, you're doing it as a stroke survivor. And you need to stop looking at it as an embarrassment and wear it as a badge of honor. And I was like, oh, wow, that's interesting. So I actually still have his letter and I keep it. It's like torn up and it's in the back of my skate bag.
I think it's so true, though. I think you should look at it as a
Yeah.
badge of honor because it's absolutely amazing. It really
And
is.
this is another full circle story. So he ended up having a stroke this past summer again. So everyone is susceptible to having them, but he had a similar story happen to him where his wife saw the warning signs. He'd already had a stroke beforehand, got him help, and he's okay.
Wow.
And I was the first person that emailed him and said, Teddy, I don't know if you remember me. It's been 7 years since we spoke, but you got me through. I'm that professional ice skater that you kept going through this Dutch TV show. And he said, of course I remember you. I'll never forget you. And thank you. This has come full circle. I needed to hear it. So I think it's whether like survivors support survivors or whether there's just somebody to be able to say, you know, it's not the end of the road.
I was going to say, do you think this is like a little message that even if you've not gone through it, or you know someone that's going through it, or has gone through it, it's really important to just be there for someone, just to be able to talk to, and not beat around the bush and be open and talk about it? Because I know once you talk about it, you feel so much better, and now you've got to a place where you feel more proud to talk about it, whereas before you'd bottle it up when it's nothing to feel ashamed or embarrassed of.
I think I felt at the time, I felt like my body had failed me. I felt like I was 24 years old and I was embarrassed and my body failed, and how could this have happened to me? And I just didn't understand it. And then I realized later on that it wasn't my fault. I think a lot of survivors have survivor's guilt, and they feel guilty.
And I think you should look at it in a positive way, that it's your mind and your body that fought against it to get you where you are. Because a lot of people, sadly, can't get through it and quit and live their whole lives really still suffering. But you've turned it around at a young age, and now look what you're doing.
And now I'm here on Dancing on Ice. And I'm lucky because I'm around a lot of people like Libby that are inspirational. And I see her and she makes me emotional. I see what she's doing and it literally chokes me up. I watched her routine for the first time and I was like really crying, and I was like, she loves it. And for me to see how much someone who has a disability loves it, I look fine on the outside. I don't look like I have a disability, but I do kind of. I have a brain injury, and sometimes I forget what I'm doing. Sometimes I forget what I'm saying. Sometimes my hands go numb. We're doing this amazing routine this week, and for me to get through it, by the end of it, it's just so much brain power, and I'm so mentally fatigued, and I don't want anyone to know that, but I also kind of feel like, in a way, by telling people that I am going through that, I'm less than perfect, and they'll realize that it's not the end of the road if you've gone through anything that I've gone through, you know? It doesn't matter what I'm doing it in what capacity.
And finally, what I want to talk about, because I know it means a lot to you as well, and I think it's amazing. Take me for a bit of the stuff that you do now in terms of with stroke charities, and the message you want to get across to maybe other people that have been in a similar situation. And people will look at you and think that you're so strong on what you've achieved, but you was also in that position where you felt like you had no way out, and was you ever going to get there? What message would you send that to other people that are in a similar position who maybe survived the stroke as well?
Yeah, I think so. For me, when I had my stroke and my family had to get tested because it is a hereditary thing, a hole in your heart. My mom was found to have the hole in her heart. My dad didn't. And my mom was put on an aspirin for a year, and then a year and a half after my stroke, my dad had a stroke, and my mom was there, and she had done so much research on strokes and symptoms and things like that she actually saved my dad's life, so my dad's okay now. But that's because of my mom knowing all these things, and my mom being so aware of this is a stroke symptom, this is what it is. So they had misdiagnosed him. They didn't see the hole in his heart. He has the stroke, and my mom saves his life. Within 11 minutes, he was in an ambulance to the hospital, which is so crucial when you have a stroke. So I think when I was approached about having to speak about this back when I was with you, and I kind of said no, I put it off for 3 months, and my mom said to me, you know, you're kind of doing a disservice to people, to other people like you, by one, not telling the story, and two, people aren't aware of these symptoms. And if they saw a symptom in an 18-year-old and they realized that that's off, they could call an ambulance and they might save their lives. And that is what my mom did for my dad.
Yeah, and I know it's hard for you to talk about it, and I know you get upset, but you don't realize how many people that will be watching this that might be in a similar situation will feel inspired and will learn a lot. So I'm very, very proud of you. So thank you. Thank you so much.